In the sultry heat of a Colombian afternoon, a helicopter sliced through the sky, its rotors beating a relentless tattoo against the thick, humid air. The year was 1991, and the machine was bound for a place that, on the surface, seemed an unlikely destination for such a formidable conveyance, a prison. Not just any prison, mind you, but La Catedral, a luxury penitentiary nestled in the verdant hills outside of Medellin. It was a far cry from the grim, cold institutions of the north, a sprawling complex that boasted a swimming pool, a sauna, a bar, and even a nightclub. The inmates here were not shackled to their cells, but lived in relative comfort, free to roam the grounds during the day, and even to entertain guests in the evenings. The helicopter touched down on the helipad, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air like a misty curtain. Out stepped a man, his dark suit crisp despite the heat, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses that reflected the harsh sunlight. Pablo Escobar Gaviria, the notorious drug kingpin, was home. Escobar was no ordinary inmate. He had negotiated his own terms of imprisonment, trading in his life on the run for a comfortable stay in La Catedral. The Colombian government, desperate to end the bloody war that Escobar's cocaine empire had wrought, had agreed. They hoped that by keeping Escobar behind bars, they could stem the tide of violence that had gripped the country. But Escobar was not one to be contained, not truly. He was a man accustomed to power, to luxury, to freedom. And so, he had turned La Catedral into his personal playground, a testament to his wealth and influence. The prison was a microcosm of his empire, a place where his lieutenants could come and go as they pleased, where business could be conducted with a nod and a smile, and where the music and laughter of his parties echoed through the night. The helicopter's rotors slowed to a stop, and Escobar strode towards the main building, his guards falling into step behind him. He was a man with a mission, a man with a secret. For Pablo Escobar had a plan, a way to reclaim his freedom and his power. He had been busy, using his time in La Catedral to lay the groundwork for his escape. He had built tunnels, stockpiled weapons, and cultivated allies. He was ready to make his move. But first, he had to keep up appearances. He had to play the part of the model prisoner, the man who had finally accepted the justice of his sentence. He had to lull his enemies into a false sense of security, to make them believe that he was beaten, that he was done. As he entered the main building, the sound of laughter and music greeted him. His men were already at work, preparing for the night's festivities. Escobar smiled, a cold, calculating smile. He was home, and he was ready to take back what was his. Meanwhile, in the heart of Bogotá, a young journalist named Virginia Vallejo was poring over her notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely determined, a woman who had made a name for herself by reporting on the dark underbelly of Colombian society. She had interviewed some of the most dangerous men in the country, had looked into the eyes of evil, and lived to tell the tale. But her latest assignment had her stumped. She had been given access to a cache of documents, secret correspondence between Pablo Escobar and his lieutenants. The letters were coded, filled with oblique references and veiled threats. They were a puzzle, a mystery waiting to be solved. Vallejo was no stranger to Escobar. She had interviewed him before, had seen the charisma and the charm that hid the monster within. She knew that he was a man who thrived on secrets, who used them to manipulate and control. She also knew that he was a man who could not be trusted, a man who would stop at nothing to protect his power and his empire. As she pored over the letters, she began to notice a pattern, a series of references to a place, a code name, the Cathedral. She knew that Escobar was being held in La Catedral, but she also knew that there was more to it than that. She could feel it, like an itch at the back of her mind, a whisper of a secret waiting to be revealed. She decided to dig deeper, to follow the trail of breadcrumbs that Escobar had left behind. She would interview his associates, his enemies, anyone who could shed light on the mystery. She would not rest until she had uncovered the truth, until she had exposed the secrets that Escobar was so desperate to keep hidden. As the sun set over Bogotá, casting long shadows across the city, Vallejo made her way to her car, a stack of notes and a determined expression in her hands. She was on the trail of a story that would change everything, a story that would lead her straight to the heart of Pablo Escobar's empire. And so, the stage was set. In the hills outside of Medellin, Pablo Escobar prepared for his escape, his eyes on the prize of freedom and power. In Bogotá, Virginia Vallejo followed the trail of secrets, her eyes on the truth. Their paths would cross, their fates would intertwine, and the result would be a story that would shake the very foundations of Colombia. But that, dear listener, is a story for another time. For now, let us leave our players where we found them, on the cusp of a mystery, on the brink of a revelation. Let us leave them with the anticipation of what is to come, with the knowledge that the game is afoot, and that the truth, like a snake, is ready to strike. In the weeks that followed, Pablo Escobar's prison, La Catedral, began to hum with an energy that was almost palpable. It was as if the very air was charged with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to happen. Escobar's men worked tirelessly, transforming the prison into a fortress, a sanctuary for their boss. They brought in everything he could possibly need: luxury cars, fine art, even a personal barber to keep his signature haircut in check. The prison was no longer a place of confinement, but a testament to Escobar's power and wealth. Meanwhile, Virginia Vallejo was making progress in her investigation. She had spoken to several of Escobar's associates, had pieced together a picture of a man who was more than just a drug lord. He was a strategist, a visionary, a man who saw the world in terms of power dynamics, and was always 2 steps ahead of his enemies. She had also discovered that the Cathedral was not just a code name, but a reference to a specific part of La Catedral, a hidden chamber where Escobar kept his most valuable secrets. Vallejo was intrigued. She knew that if she could find that chamber, she could find the truth about Escobar's operations, about his plans for the future. She began to make plans of her own, plans that would take her deep into the heart of Escobar's territory, plans that would put her in direct contact with the man himself. Back at La Catedral, Escobar was growing restless. He had been in prison for months, and while his men had done their best to make it comfortable, it was still a prison. He longed for the freedom of the outside world, for the thrill of the chase, for the power that came from being the one in control. He began to plan his escape, a daring operation that would involve bribing the guards, disabling the security systems, and making a run for it in one of his luxury cars. His men were divided. Some were loyal to a fault, ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Others were more cautious, warning him of the dangers, of the risks involved. But Escobar was not a man to be deterred. He had made his decision, and he was ready to put his plan into action. Vallejo, meanwhile, had made her way to Medellin. She had set up a meeting with one of Escobar's closest associates, a man who she knew had access to the inner workings of the organization. She was nervous, but also exhilarated. She was close, she could feel it. She was on the cusp of a revelation that could change everything. The meeting was set for a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Vallejo arrived early, her eyes scanning the crowd, looking for any sign of danger. She was a woman on a mission, a woman with a purpose. She was not afraid. As she waited, she noticed a man across the street, standing under a tree, watching her. He was tall, handsome, with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a feeling of unease that she couldn't quite shake off. She looked away, trying to focus on the task at hand, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Suddenly, the man started walking towards her. He was dressed in a suit, his stride confident, his eyes never leaving hers. Vallejo felt a lump form in her throat, a sense of dread washing over her. She knew, in that moment, that she was in trouble. "Miss Vallejo," the man said, his voice smooth, his accent thick. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Vallejo looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew who he was. Of course, she had seen his picture in the papers, had heard the stories about his ruthlessness. She was looking into the eyes of a killer, and she knew that her life was in danger. But she also knew that she had come too far to back down now. She had a story to tell, a truth to reveal. She was not going to let fear stop her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady, her eyes meeting his. "I'm here to meet a source, that's all." The man smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Miss Vallejo, and I think you're going to give it to me, one way or another." The tension in the cafe was palpable. The other patrons had fallen silent, their eyes on the scene unfolding before them. They knew who the man was. They knew the danger he posed. They were all waiting to see what would happen next. Vallejo took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew that she was outmatched, that she was in over her head. But she also knew that she had to keep going, that she had to find a way out of this. "I have something for you," she said, her voice steady. "But it's not here. It's back at my hotel. I'll give it to you, but you have to promise to leave me alone. You have to promise to let me finish my story." The man considered her for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Then he nodded. "Very well, Miss Vallejo. But remember, I always get what I want, one way or another." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Vallejo alone in the cafe, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She knew that she had made a deal with the devil, that she had put herself in grave danger. But she also knew that she had no choice. She had to see this through, no matter what the cost. Meanwhile, back at La Catedral, Escobar was making his final preparations. He had bribed the guards, had disabled the security systems. He was ready to make his escape, ready to reclaim his power, ready to take back what was his. But as he prepared to leave, he received a message, a warning from one of his men. Virginia Vallejo was in Medellin. She was asking questions. She was getting too close. He knew, in that moment, that he had a problem. He had to deal with Vallejo, had to silence her before she could reveal his secrets. He picked up his phone, dialed a number that he knew by heart. "It's time," he said, his voice cold, his eyes hard. "Take care of the problem. Make it look like an accident." As he hung up the phone, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He was in control. He was always in control. He would deal with Vallejo, would silence her before she could cause any more trouble. He would escape from La Catedral, would reclaim his power, would take back what was his. But he also knew that his actions would have consequences, that his enemies would be watching, waiting for their chance to strike. He knew that he was playing a dangerous game, a game that could cost him everything. And so, the stage was set for a climax that would shake the very foundations of Colombia, a climax that would change everything. In the hills outside of Medellin, Pablo Escobar prepared for his escape, his eyes on the prize of freedom and power. In Bogotá, Virginia Vallejo followed the trail of secrets, her eyes on the truth. Their paths would cross, their fates would intertwine, and the result would be a story that would shake the very foundations of Colombia. But that, dear listener, is a story for another time. For now, let us leave our players where we found them, on the brink of a climax, on the edge of a revelation. Let us leave them with the anticipation of what is to come, with the knowledge that the game is afoot, and that the truth, like a snake, is ready to strike. In the dead of night, Pablo Escobar slipped out of La Catedral, his heart pounding in his chest, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. He had made it, had escaped the prison that had become his gilded cage, had reclaimed his freedom. But he knew that this was only the beginning, that the hardest part was still to come. As he made his way through the hills, he heard a noise, a rustling in the bushes. He froze, his hand reaching for his gun, his eyes searching the darkness. Then, he saw her, Virginia Vallejo, her eyes wide with fear, her body trembling. She had followed him, had tracked him down, had come to confront him. "Pablo," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know what you've done. I know about the murders, about the corruption, about the drugs. I can't stay silent anymore. I have to tell the truth." Escobar looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, he smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a shiver down Vallejo's spine. "Virginia," he said, his voice soft, dangerous. "You should have stayed out of this. You should have minded your own business." He raised his gun, pointed it at her, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out, echoing through the hills. Escobar staggered back, his hand clutching his chest, blood pouring from the wound. He looked up, his eyes filled with shock and betrayal, and saw his own men, his own soldiers, lowering their guns, their faces filled with regret. "You can't escape your past, Pablo," one of them said, his voice heavy with sadness. "You've done too much, hurt too many people. It's time for this to end." As Escobar fell to the ground, his life slipping away, Vallejo stood over him, her eyes filled with tears, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and regret. She had done it, had brought the most powerful man in Colombia to his knees, had exposed his crimes to the world. But at what cost? She had put herself in danger, had put her life on the line, had made enemies that would haunt her for the rest of her days. As the sun rose over the hills, casting a golden light over the scene, Vallejo turned away, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. She knew that this was not the end, that there would be more battles to fight, more truths to reveal. But she also knew that she had made a difference, that she had changed the course of history. And so, as Pablo Escobar's body was taken away, as his empire crumbled around him, as the world watched and waited, Virginia Vallejo stood alone in the hills, her eyes on the horizon, her heart filled with a sense of purpose, a sense of justice served. She had faced the devil and lived to tell the tale. But the question remained, what now? What would become of her, of Colombia, of the truth that she had uncovered? Only time would tell. But for now, as the sun rose over the hills, as the first rays of light pierced the darkness, Virginia Vallejo knew that she had done what was right, had followed her conscience, had stood up for what she believed in. And in the end, that was all that mattered. As she turned to leave, she looked back one last time, her eyes lingering on the spot where Escobar had fallen. And she saw, in the dust, a single flower blooming, its petals delicate, its color vibrant, a symbol of life, of hope, of the future. And she knew, in that moment, that no matter what came next, no matter what challenges she would face them with courage, with strength, with the knowledge that she had made a difference. And so, dear listener, as we bring our story to a close, as we say goodbye to Pablo Escobar and Virginia Vallejo, we are left with a question that echoes through the hills, that lingers in the air, that haunts our dreams. What now? What comes next? What will become of the truth that was uncovered, of the justice that was served, of the lives that were changed forever? Only time will tell. But one thing is for certain, the story of Pablo Escobar and Virginia Vallejo, the story of power and corruption, of truth and justice, of courage and sacrifice, will live on, will echo through the ages, will serve as a reminder of the power of the human spirit, of the strength of the human will, of the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. And so, as we close this chapter, as we say goodbye to our players, we leave you with this thought, this question, this reflection. What would you do in the face of evil, in the face of corruption, in the face of danger? Would you stand up? Would you fight back? Would you make a difference? Or would you turn away? Would you stay silent? Would you let the darkness win? The choice, dear listener, is yours. The stage is set. The players are in place. The curtain is about to rise. The question is, what role will you play in this grand drama? This epic tale of truth and justice, of power and corruption, of courage and sacrifice. The choice is yours. The stage awaits. The curtain is about to rise. What will you do?